everyone, it's Taylor from Bravely Beautiful, and today I will be reviewing the new Urban Decay Naked Reloaded palette that just launched the end of February. If you would like to see my full thoughts as well as see how I created this eye look, then just keep watching. Okay, so I was super excited for the launch of this palette for a number of reasons, but number one, the first palette I ever bought was the original Naked palette from Urban Decay. I remember saving up my money and being so excited to go and buy this palette. You know, it was the first of its kind. They were the first ones to create a large palette like this, the large neutral palette, and it's kind of a cult favorite. But they have since stopped making it. So when I saw that they were, quote, reinventing the Naked palette, I was really excited to see what they were going to come out with and bought it pretty much the minute that it came out. So it's important to note that they do say this is a reinvention of the original Naked palette. So you do have to compare it to the original one to kind of get the full thoughts on it. So let's talk about the packaging. It's pretty much the same as almost all of the palettes that Urban Decay comes out with. You know, Naked 1 had that slim rectangular palette, and so does the new Naked Reloaded palette. So they just changed the finishing and the look of the outside a little bit. It has this like satin sheen. I don't really know what this pattern is. I mean, it's cool. I can definitely see this getting dirty because it has like the satin finish and it kind of absorbs powder if it gets on it. One other thing to note is that it doesn't come with the free like brush or eyeliner that they used to give out with their palettes. It doesn't come with any of that anymore. I was kind of disappointed to see that because I have always utilized those brushes and eyeliners, so that was kind of a disappointment. The new Naked Reloaded palette has the same number of eyeshadows as the old Naked palette. They both had 12 shades, and they're almost exactly the same size. The difference is the way they have now laid out the eyeshadows in the palette. So originally, the first Urban Decay Naked palette, all of the shadows were the same size. And the new Naked Reloaded palette, they have made the shadows that they think that you will use more often, like the transition shades and the highlight shades, they've made those bigger because in theory you're going to use more of them so you can use the palette up more equally. I really actually like that they have done that because that was definitely something I found with the first Naked palette, is that I went through those transition shades a lot faster than all of the other shades. So I really like that they've done that. Now this palette is $44, which I think is a reasonable price for a high-end eyeshadow palette, especially from Urban Decay, so I wasn't surprised by that. Let's talk about the formula. I found the formula overall to be a little bit drier and more powdery than the original Naked palette, as well as all of the other Naked palettes that I have. There's no question that they're highly pigmented and blend well, but you are going to have a ton of fallout. You'll see in the tutorial that I did that I had to brush away fallout many times. If I had to do it over, I would do my eyeshadow first and then my foundation. That's just not typically the way I do it. I don't like doing it that way, but I feel that that's really necessary with this palette if you're doing any sort of a dark eye look. Even though the finishes and textures vary widely in this palette, I find that they are equally pigmented and blend well throughout the palette. So let's talk about the specific shades. So we have Bribe, which is a beautiful shimmery highlight shade, slightly pink. We have Barely Baked, which is a light gold shade. We have Angel Fire. Angel Fire is the one that I found to be the least pigmented. I think that it is supposed to be an overspray, like a glitter overspray that you can put over anything. I still enjoy it and think that I'll use it. Then we have Retro, which is this matte coral shade, and that definitely seems to be the one out of the whole palette that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, where you're like, this doesn't really go with the rest of the eyeshadows. But I think that this would be a great transition shade for women of color or darker skin tones. So once I kind of thought about that, I guess it kind of makes sense. Then you have Reputation, which is kind of a rose gold, just kind of a rose gold shade. Then you have Burn, which is a darker coppery rose gold shade. You have Endgame, which at first I thought was just a matte brown, like a deep matte brown, but it actually has a tiny bit of glitter in there. Then you have Dreamwear, which is a like gunmetal glittery color, which has a ton of fallout. You have Distilled, which is actually a pretty unique shade, and I really like that shade. It's a dark bronzy brown shimmery shade, which is great for doing like a one shadow smoky eye. You have Bucked, which is the only eyeshadow that you'll find in any other palette, like in the original Naked palette, which is a great blending shade. Then you have Boundaries, which is another good transition or blending shade. That is also a unique color because it's kind of a peachy, orangey, taupey, it's hard to describe. Like it's a unique shade, but I think it works great as a transition shade, but it definitely has an orangey tone. It's great for bringing out blue eyes. And then you have Blur, which is probably the lightest of the transitions, but I think is a fabulous transition shade, especially for smoky eyes. Okay, now let's cut over to the tutorial and I'll show you how I got this look. Okay, so I started off by packing on Distilled all over my lid. And then I also took it up into my crease a little bit. And I decided it wasn't dark enough, so I packed on some of Endgame on top of that. And then put a little bit more of Distilled back on top. And then I took Bucked with a fluffy blending brush and blended that into the crease, and then just slightly up above the crease where you can still see it when you look straight ahead. Then I took another different fluffy blending brush and blended just a little bit of boundaries, basically right on the edge of that bucked color. Then I took my fingertip with some of Dreamweaver and did that right on the center of my eyelid just to give it some sheen right there. That had a lot of fallout, so I then had to try to brush that away with a little bit of powder on a big fluffy blending brush. Then I took a little bit of Reputation and put that all the way under on my lower eyelid, from the inner corner to the outer corner basically. And then I took a little bit of Endgame on that same brush and put a little bit on the outer corner of my lower lid and then also on the outer corner of my upper lid, just packing that on for some depth. Make your eyes look a little bit bigger when you do this. So then I took my beauty sponge and just kind of went over the edge on the outside. I think it makes it look a little softer when you're doing a smoky eye. Then I like to warm up my eyeliner on the back of my hand. It just goes on a little bit more smoothly when it's warm. And so then I really pushed that into my upper lash line here. Just did it really messy. It doesn't need to be precise because we're going to smoke it out a little bit here. So then I take some of that eyeliner on a stiff pencil brush, and I use that to smoke out the upper lash line. Then I took a little bit of Barely Baked, which is a light golden shade, on the inner corner, as well as a little bit on the inner part of my lower lash line and upper lid area. Just add some brightness and a little bit of sheen and shine. It opens up the eyes some. And then last I took Bribe, which was my highlight shade, and put that all the way under my upper brow bone. Okay, and then just to clean everything up at the end, I put a little bit more concealer because of all the fallout that I had had, and used my beauty sponge to blend that out and brighten everything back up. The last thing that I did was put on some lashes, and they were just the Demi Wispies from Ardell, and then did my eyebrows, and that's it. I actually think that this palette would have been easier to review if they had not said that it was a reinvention of the original Naked One palette. Just because then you have to compare it to the original Naked palette, which is such an iconic palette that it's kind of hard to beat that. They did such a great job. So as far as my final thoughts, if I was just reviewing this as any eyeshadow palette, I think it's a great neutral eyeshadow palette. The only negative that I have for it is that it has a ton of fallout and it's kind of powdery, but the shadows are super pigmented and they blend really well. If I have to compare it to the original Naked palette, I think I prefer the original Naked palette. I think that you can get more looks that are really different from each other than with this Naked Reloaded palette. I like them both, but if I had to choose, I would say the first Naked palette. Now that being said, it's unavailable. So I do think the Naked Reloaded palette is a great neutral palette, and I don't think you'll be disappointed in it. I just recommend doing your eyeshadow before your foundation. I hope you enjoyed this review and that it was helpful and informative if you were thinking about checking out this palette yourself. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to see more content from me. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions for me, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.